I made the fatal mistake of rewatching Gladiator before watching the sequel, because I was able to see how practically identical the two movies are.
Corporate needs you to find the differences between this picture and this picture. They're the same picture.
Which, for this review, I'll go into some minor plot beats within the first 2 acts, and won't discuss any Act 3 spoilers until stated in the timecode. So to open this review, I want to highlight the similarities between the two movies. We have a protagonist befallen by a tragedy that turns them into a slave and then into a gladiator, both done through opening battles. The progression of the plot is the same, where the main character has to fight through the pits and eventually makes it to the Colosseum. We have yet another oppressive emperor or emperors who literally come out of nowhere. Keep in mind that the time between the two movies is 16 years, and the writers leave their ascent to power as being unexplained. Which, given their nature, it's really confusing as to how they became emperors because they weren't a part of the royal bloodline, and they're portrayed as being incompetent buffoons. The general leading the Roman army, Marcus, is almost the same as Maximus, who is worn down and just wants to retire back to his family. He also happens to be in a relationship with Lucilla, just like Maximus. There's an identical subplot where they conspire to take Rome with a military coup that also ends the same way as in the original. The main character has the same arc as Maximus, and there are multiple scenes that are straight up copied from the original. There's more, but right away, this paints the picture of Gladiator 2 clearly being a retread of the original. At the very least, Act 3 does take an original direction, but that should apply to the whole movie. To some people, all of these similarities may be a positive. However, I'd argue that a lot of these copied aspects are done worse in Gladiator 2. Like, the first main example is that the main character is less compelling than Maximus. Maximus was a respected military general, and he had this unspoken gravitas that carried so much weight. He swiftly gained the respect of all of his gladiator comrades through his brilliant stratagem, and that's something that's lacking in the second film, since the main character isn't a general. His great advice was to simply jump out of the way from a rushing rhino, which should act as common sense, and he did at least have some good strategic moves in the naval battle set piece, but I felt as though that was kind of compromised by his apparent plot armor in that he was plainly standing out in the open steering his ship when getting constantly barraged by arrows. So to me, that bond and sense of camaraderie is far weaker, and there also aren't any additional gladiator characters like Juba from the first film that accentuated the bond Maximus had with his comrades. Gladiator 2 does have this medic character, but he's not actually participating in the games, so that doesn't create any other character for you to worry about. It's already made clear that the main character will survive these encounters because he's the main character, but to inject suspense back into the story, you need to create more side characters that can die in these battles that you care for. And since the movie is 2 hours and 40 minutes, it's really surprising that none of the other Gladiator people rise above being background extras. Also, while on the topic of the Gladiator set pieces, a lot of them felt gimmicky and felt surprisingly worse than what the original offered. The first one was against a bunch of monkeys, which was a really odd action scene as our real humans are fighting and wrestling CGI monsters. To be fair, it could have looked worse, but just from a conceptual standpoint, I would have preferred them fighting real people, as that proves actual skill of fighting other humans, which should be the main skill set of gladiators. The second one is a fight against someone riding a rhino, and right away, there's an easy counter to the danger in that all you have to do is jump out of the way before it hits you. So to put simply, it wasn't suspenseful. The third was the naval battle, which, as I said before, was plagued with apparent plot armor, but it was at least more fun than the others. Then the titular fight between Marcus and the main character was by far the most interesting, as that included actual fighting choreography, which to me is way more interesting than dodging slow-moving animals and wrestling CGI monkeys. All of the original Gladiator set pieces didn't have this problem, and also allowed Maximus to come up with clever strategies to overcome the harder obstacles imposed on them, like forming different battle formations to counter the enemy's attacks, while in the new one, that's limited to jumping out of the way of a rushing animal or just entirely ignoring logic. This kneecaps the progression the main character has in terms of gaining the respect of his fellow gladiators and making it feel like he's becoming a legend. Another major problem with the main character is that the writer opts to keep his identity as being this big point of mystery for the first half of the film, which the massive issue here is that that's immediately revealed in the very first trailer.
I remember that day. I never forgot it.
Not to mention that the first shot in the movie is the creators directly and plainly implying that this is Lucius, the son of Maximus and Lucilla. This is such a massive contradiction in storytelling where the creators show the audience that this is Lucius, and then I guess they assume that we're too dumb to understand that, so they treat his identity as a mystery until plainly telling us who he is. That's pretty baffling from a writing standpoint, and you'd think he should lean into his identity from the get-go, thus giving his character more of a unique identity instead of being a Maximus 2.0. He also has a wife in the very beginning, and the second she shows up, you immediately know she's going to die, and that's going to be his primary motivator for revenge. This in comparison to Maximus being promised Rome, only for Commodus to steal it out from under him by killing his own father and betraying Maximus, while also massacring his family, is a much better way to anchor you to the protagonist's drive. Instead of having the most stereotypical writing trope of setting up a surface-level love interest and immediately killing them off. That's like a night and day difference. So, Gladiator 2 essentially opens with you not really caring about the main hero's journey that's also just the same as Maximus's, and the writers induce the audience with confusion as to why they're holding his identity as a secret. Again, something that it copies from the original where Maximus keeps his identity a secret. Pivoting over to talk about some good aspects before going into Act 3 and some spoilers, I think the best part of the movie is by far the acting. Everyone delivers a great performance, and some are quite hindered by the writing, like the main character. Although, to give the story some credit, I did genuinely like the dynamic of Lucius and Marcus, and how that evolves throughout the story. Their confrontation and fight was by far and away the best moment in the movie, but again, that's still just a slightly altered climax from the original. And after that point, I don't think the movie ever gets to that height of excitement again. One other thing is that the movie looks incredible and feels more cinematic and of a higher quality than the original, which is kind of a given since the budget is much higher, and this is being made 20 years later, so we have access to better technology. Although, this advancement in tech kind of allowed the creators to realize action scenes that probably should have stayed in the conceptual stage, like the monkey fight. Just because you can do something that you couldn't before, doesn't mean you should do it. Going into the spoiler section of the video, let's address Act 3 and the ending. I said earlier that this was the more original section of the movie, and that's because Denzel Washington's character Macrinus has his own rise to power. His character I think was a definite standout, but I think the writing surrounding his rise was still pretty wobbly. Like, he's supposed to be this cunning and smart guy, but his actions leading up to this don't really communicate that from a writing standpoint. His main action in the story up until manipulating one of the emperors was winning bets against someone else on the Senate, and essentially they keep doubling down until the politician is completely in debt to Macrinus. To which, he figures out that there's a background Q formulating, and is able to foil it to gain favor with the emperors. But getting to this point and just winning bets and having this politician be a degenerate gambler is not really communicative of Macrinus being brilliant. Like, he doesn't even know that Lucius is a very skilled warrior. All he did up until this point was wrestle a monkey and beat someone up in a fistfight, so going all in on this random guy is definitely questionable. It's not like the original where Maximus decimates and solos most of the gladiators in the pits. Now, for the gambling point, this isn't to say that it's unrealistic for people to throw away everything and for others to benefit from that, but writing it in this manner doesn't achieve the adept and intelligent characteristics that this character should embody. His rise comes about by pure chance and luck. That's not a major problem, but anyways, Macrinus betrays the emperors and gains control of the Praetorian Guard. As a side note, it feels pretty surprising that no one in the Senate is against this. The politics in general in this movie feels way more degraded and shallow in comparison to the original. While this is going down, Lucius is able to mobilize the Roman army, encamped nearby with proof that he's Maximus' son and is the true heir of Rome. This naturally leads to an ending confrontation between Lucius and Macrinus, and the major problem here is that these two characters have a massive age gap. One person is in their 20s and the other is in their 60s. So having a sword fight between these two guys is laughable for the final climax, as there's no suspense in terms of who's going to win. It's basically an anti-climax, and it's also really questionable for how Lucius is able to approach Macrinus when he's at the head of his army and he has to ride through all the Praetorian soldiers to get to him. I wouldn't be surprised if this battle was supposed to unfold, but the studio execs saw that, hey, we can easily save money by having these two people fight instead of having a full-on battle, even though they're like 30 to 40 years apart. Also, if the fight between Lucius and Macrinus is the endpoint of the narrative, then making Macrinus much younger should have been a necessity to make the climactic fight more believable, which I feel this further points to this ending being a last-second change. It's really odd that this directly resembles the boxing match between Jake Paul and Mike Tyson, and it's fundamentally head-scratching basing the finale on this moment. And the way they go about nerfing Lucius is hilarious, in that he breaks his own sword by blatantly and moronically swinging it into a rock column which shatters it. So yeah, even the third act was pretty underwhelming, but I guess seeing how new and original plot beats play out was at the very least more interesting than watching what was essentially a worse remake for the first two acts. Again, since I saw the original before seeing the sequel, I feel like I'm going to fundamentally dislike it more than others, because it seems like this movie is getting pretty positive reviews, while to me, it just seems like a cut and dry, uninspired retread of the original. Thank you for watching, and my Letterboxd, Discord, and Patreon links are in the description. Thank you as always to Logan Farmer for being my top tier patron.